This is Elgin Cathedral, final resting place of Alexander Stewart, Earl of Buchan. The most evil man in Scottish history. A man so bad he was excommunicated and died after losing a game of chess with the devil. Maybe. Or maybe he's just misunderstood. Welcome to Scotland Unplugged, a very windy Loch and Dorb, and the story of the Wolf of Badenoch. I had to get up pretty early to make this one, but I got to drive through some of my favourite bits of the country, so worth it. This is Loch and Dorb, and on an island out there in the middle is Loch and Dorb Castle. It was built by the Cummins and heavily upgraded with 4 corner towers and a curtain wall when Edward I of England stayed here during his campaign in the First War of Independence in 1303. It's said to have been one of the Wolf's favourite lairs, one of the places he rode out from, and you can see why. But as far as we know, he was never actually called the Wolf in his lifetime. In charters, he's listed as Alexander Senescali, Latin for Alexander Stewart, and in contemporary Gaelic society, he was known as Alistair Mór Mac an Rai, Great Alexander, the king's son. He was born around 1343, the third surviving son of the future Robert II, but he wasn't content to be a spare. He'd go on to become Justiciar of Scotia and hold vast lands here in the north. But his path to getting all that was a bit iffy. His father was Robert Stewart. The Stewarts were the High Stewards of Scotland, looking after the royal household. But Robert's father, Walter, the 6th High Steward, had married Robert the Bruce's daughter, Marjorie. Jackpot. Robert didn't get on well with his uncle, David II, who quite rightly thought he had designs on the throne. So Uncle David's parliament made Robert and all his sons swear an oath, requiring them to keep their followers in check. It may be that they broke their oaths, as Robert and possibly Alexander ended up imprisoned on Loch Leven Island. Eventually though, their fortunes changed. Robert became the first Stuart king, founding a dynasty. But new dynasties are precarious things, with a lot of reordering. He needed someone who could trust in the north, so he made Alexander Lord of Badnoch. But the wolf was still hungry for power and land. In 1371, he leased the lands of Urquhart from his half-brother. In 1372, he got his hands on more land and became Royal Justiciar in the Appin of Dull in Perthshire. That title gave him crown authority from Perthshire to the Pentland Firth. But that wasn't enough. His next move was to marry Euphemia, Countess of Ross. That made him Earl of Ross, and extended his influence as far as Lewis and Skye. But none of that land grabbing made him very popular with the locals, and Alexander Burr, the Bishop of Moray, really wasn't happy. This magnificent beast is Elgin Cathedral, the bishop's pride and joy. It was completed in 1248, and it was the second biggest cathedral in the country in its day, second only to St Andrews. It was known as the Lantern of the North. The bishop himself called it the ornament of the realm, the glory of the kingdom. The bishop had kind of a free hand up here in the northeast. In 1370, he'd entered into a protection agreement with Alexander. The wolf used hired hands, caterans, bands of mercenaries to keep order, or at least his kind of order. And when Alexander became Lord of Badnoch, his caterans were on church lands. Meanwhile, down south, there was trouble brewing. Alexander's brothers, John, Earl of Carrick, and Robert, Duke of Albany, were pretty power-hungry themselves. The king wasn't in the best of health, and the brothers vied for control. John effectively ran things, and other local landowners tried to reassert their authority, but Alexander held on. By 1387, he'd extended his influence to become Justiciar north of the Forth. That's a fairly big chunk of land. But things were only getting more complicated. In 1388, it was clear that the Earl of Carrick was making a mess of things, so his younger brother, the Duke of Albany, took over. And one of his first moves was to install his son Murdoch as Justiciar north of the Forth. Things weren't great at home either. In fact, Alexander wasn't really at home. Euphemia and Alexander's marriage hadn't produced an heir. Alexander had left his wife behind and was living with his mistress, Mairead, with whom he had several children. It's thought he might have had as many as 40 children in his lifetime. The Bishop of Moray might not have had complete control of his lands anymore, but he was still the boss when it came to all things spiritual. This is where the bishop would have sat, right next to the altar. He commanded Alexander to return to his wife immediately, and when Alexander agreed but didn't follow through, he encouraged Euphemia to divorce him. Robert II died on the 19th of April 1390. John, Earl of Carrick, would be crowned Robert III, but not until the following August, leaving a gap and a lot of uncertainty. His brother Robert was retained as Guardian of Scotland. The Bishop of Moray decided he no longer required Alexander's protection and entered into an agreement with Thomas Dunbar, the Sheriff of Inverness and son of the Earl of Moray, one of Alexander's rivals. With his father's protection gone, a brother stepping on his toes, and a bishop interfering in his marriage, consorting with his rivals and trying to take away his wife and her lands, the Wolf was under pressure and made the move that would come to define his reputation. In May, he destroyed the town of Forres and Plascarden Abbey. In June, he came here with his wild, wicked Hieland men, and he burned the Lantern of the North and everything in it. He was excommunicated for his crimes and forced to attend Blackfriars in Perth in the presence of his brothers, the King and the Earl of Fife, and the Council General. He was made to repent, wearing sackcloth, and then the Bishop of St Andrews absolved him, proving once and for all that it's not what you know, it's who you know. Alexander died in 1394 or 1405. These are the remains of Ruthven Barracks, 18th century British government buildings on the site of a much earlier castle. Legend has it that Alexander was here in Ruthven Castle on a stormy night when a tall stranger dressed in black appeared at the door. The stranger challenged him to a game of chess, and the wolf, unable to resist a challenge, agreed. The storm got crazier and the thunder boomed louder and louder as the game went on, and the stranger called check, then checkmate. In the morning, the wolf and all his servants were found dead. There wasn't a mark on his body, but the nails had been pulled from his boots. The darkly dressed stranger had been Old Nick, the devil himself. But does the wolf deserve his title? Is he really the most evil man in Scottish history? It's probably worth mentioning that a lot of his reputation comes from the writings of the church, and he wasn't too popular with them. And while Alexander might have burned down a church, his great-grandfather, Robert the Bruce, murdered a rival in a church. He wasn't even the only one to have a go at Elgin Cathedral. 12 years later, in 1402, the Lord of the Isles burned everything around it. I think he was more just a man of his time. And let's face it, everyone loves an anti-hero.